Hello, lovely students. Welcome to my lessons on repetition. And today we're going to be looking at using a for loop to enter a list of names. Also using a for loop to display a list of name and a corresponding learner's mark. And in today also we're going to find the sum and average mark. So let's have a look at those techniques. So the first one is capture names. So all I'm doing in this technique is entering a list of names. Let's change that to a smaller value so that when I'm inputting data, I don't have to do it so many times. Okay, so I've created a variable called I, which is of data type integer. That's my loop counter. Remember I said to you, your variable could be I, it could be J, it could be K, it could be I count, it could be I loop. It doesn't matter what you name that variable. I've created a variable called sname, and sname is going to be used as a string variable to allow the user to enter a name using an input box. And each time I enter a name, all I'm doing is displaying the name. Let's look at how the loop works. So the loop starts at 1 and ends at 5. It means that this loop is going to execute 5 times. So when I is 1, it tests the condition, is I less than or equal to 5? If the condition evaluates to true, it executes statements inside the loop. So it's going to get a value from the input box and it's going to display the name. I then gets incremented. I is now 2. It goes back up and checks the condition. Is 2 less than or equal to 5? If the condition is true, it gets the next name and it displays the next name. I then is incremented. I is now 3. It goes back up. Is 3 less than or equal to 5? Condition evaluates to true. So long as the condition evaluates to true, it executes statements inside the loop. When I is 6, the loop terminates. Let's have a look at how it works. Okay, capture names. Let's just put in quickly 5 learners' name. And the loop terminates. Okay, so let's look at the next button. So the next button, all I'm doing is displaying 10 learners' names and their corresponding marks. I want my display to be neatly displayed in columns with headings. Let's have a look at it. So I created a variable called I again, and that is my loop counter. It's of data type integer. I'm entering a learner's mark, and the mark, I'm getting a value from an input box, and that's also of data type integer. I'm entering a name which is of data type string. I'm getting that name from an input box. Before the loop, I am displaying headings. So perhaps I can put in a comment. Headings always appears before a loop. So you have to put the headings before you start the loop. Remember, I only want a heading to appear at the top of something only once. If I put the heading inside the loop, it will execute that many times that the loop is going to be running. Remember, a for loop performs fixed repetition. It repeats a number of statements inside the loop that many times that the loop starts and ends. So it starts at 1, ends at 10, and it's going to be executed 10 times. So you do not want the heading inside the loop. So headings go before the loop always. So the loop is starting at 1, ending at 10, and the loop is executing 10 times. Let's look at the statements being executed in the loop. I'm entering a name. I'm getting a name from an input box. When I is 1, it's going to get the first name. It's then going to get the first corresponding mark of the student. It then displays the name, a tab setting, multiple tab setting, and then it displays the corresponding mark. I now goes to 2. It's incremented by 1. This is an incremental for loop. So it increments by 1. I now goes to 2. It tests the condition. Is 2 less than or equal to 10? True. So long as this condition is true, it executes the statement, it gets a name, it gets the next mark, it displays the name, it displays the mark. I then gets incremented. I is now 3. It goes back up, it tests the condition. Is 3 less than or equal to 10? True. It gets the third name, the third mark, displays the name, displays the mark. And the loop executes until the end of the loop is reached, which is 10. It starts at 1 and it must end at 10. It performs fixed repetition. Okay, so let's run this program and see how it works. Okay, so display name and mark. I'm going to display. So just be careful when you're capturing multiple data with different data types. You do not make a mistake and enter, instead of entering a string value, an integer value for the mark, you entered it as string and then it results in an error. Okay, so the loop terminates and it displays your names and marks as a heading. It displays all the learners' names that you entered via a dialog box, and it displays the corresponding marks neatly aligned in columns. Let's go and amend this program. So what I want to do now is I want to get the average mark and display the average mark of all the learners in my class. And you know that in order to get the average mark, if I've got 10 marks to get the average mark, I add all 10 marks and I divide by 10 to get the average. So what I'm physically doing is I'm taking 79, I'm adding it to 97, I'm adding 100, I'm adding 49 to it, then I'm adding 72, and I'm doing that whilst I'm in that loop. So let's have a look and see how that works. So let's amend the program that we got. So the first thing we're doing is that we need to find the sum first before we calculate average. So let's call it iSum. And then I also want to get the average mark. So let's go and create a variable called daverage, and that's of data type double. Right, so the first thing I'm going to do is before my for loop, the value of iSum must be initialized to 0. It must be given a starting position, because what I'm going to be doing each time I enter the mark, enter the name, enter the mark, I'm going to sum up that mark. So each time I enter the mark, I'm going to sum up that mark. So the first time when I is 1, it's going to take the previous value of sum, which is 0. So the previous value of sum all the time, okay, whatever the value is, remember we're performing an accumulation technique. Each time that I iterates, I'm going to sum up each value that is entered as a mark. So I sum plus the mark that is entered. So let's see how that's going to work. So when I is 1, so I created a variable and I initialized it to 0. So the first thing is create a sum variable and initialize the variable to 0. Give it a starting value. I then starts off at 1. I enter a name, I enter the mark, and now I'm summing up. When I'm summing up, I'm saying I sum is assigned I sum plus I mark. So it takes the existing value of sum, which is 0, and it adds the first mark. So the first mark we entered was 79. Sum now has the value 79. I go back up. Okay, I'm going to display the name and the mark. Then I'm going to increment at this point, I'm going to increment the value of I to 2. I go back up and I is now 2. It checks the condition. It's true. It's less than or equal to 10. I enter the name. I enter the mark. It comes in and says I sum is assigned I sum. And the current value of I sum is 79 plus the next mark, which is 97. It's then going to add 79 plus 97, and that will give you a value of sum. So if you have to take 79 plus 97, and that will give you 176. So the value of sum is equal to 176 at the moment. So I then display the learner's name and display the learner's mark. I now is incremented, and I now goes to 3. I now test my condition. It's true. It's less than or equal to 10. I enter the next name and the next mark. I come in now and say I sum is assigned I sum. So what's the current value of I sum? 176. So the current value of I sum is 176. I now enter the next mark. And the next mark is 100. The value of sum now is 276. I sum now has a value of 276. It displays the name, it displays the mark. I increment my loop counter I to the next value, which is 3. I go back up and I is now 1, 2, 3, 4. I is now 4. I enter the name, I enter the mark. I'm now summing up, and I sum, which is the current value of 276. So let's change that. I sum now has the current value of 276. I'm now saying 276 plus the value of I mark, the next mark. So just say if the next mark was 50. I'm now adding 276 to 50, okay, and that will give me 326. So the value of sum now is 326. I display the name, I display the mark. I now gets incremented, I now becomes 5. I go back up, it tests is 5 less than or equal to 10. I enter the name, I enter the mark, and then sum. The current value of sum now is 326. The current value of sum is 326 plus, I now enter the next mark, and just say the next mark was 100%. So value of sum at this point will now be 426. And it continues until the loop ends when I is 11. The loop will terminate. Okay, so now that I found the sum, how do I now find the average mark? To find the average mark, I will find it only once outside the loop. So let's I created a variable called d_average. And to find the average mark, it's going to be the value of sum. This performs real division, the slash. I know how many marks I entered because the for loop performs fixed repetition. I divide that by 10, and then all I'm going to do is display. Okay, so you can just copy that display statement and paste it. And then all you're doing, remember, it's not int to string, but float to string. And I want to display the average mark. And I called my variable d_average. Okay, so let's run this program and see how it works. Do not forget accumulation technique. iSum is assigned iSum plus iMark. And each time, as you enter the mark, it adds the markup. And as you enter the next mark, it keeps track of the previous mark. Let's run it. Okay, so let's enter names and marks. Okay, so that enters 10 names and 10 marks, and it displayed the average mark, which was 77.3. But it would have been nice if I had to put in a heading. So let's go and do that, but I'm not going to run it again. So all I'm going to do is put in a heading here. Let's put in a heading so that it displays something, average mark. Okay, so that would have displayed a heading. Also, if you wanted the average mark to be formatted, you could have said float to string f d_average, comma ff number, comma 8, comma 2. Okay, and that would have displayed the average mark. We don't want it to 2 decimal places. So if you put 0, it will display to no decimal places. Alternatively, instead of using float to string f, you could have created d_average as integer, and you could have used round. I'm just going to show you that quickly. Round is a function of the math unit. Okay, so you could have used round there. Okay, and instead of using float to string f, I just want to take that out so I can show you how to use round. And you can get rid of that. But that's one way of doing it. And if you're using round, then you could have made the average value, instead of saying it's a double value, you could have made it I_average. And instead of I_average being double, it could be integer. Okay, so let's look at it again. So if I was dividing an integer divided by another integer, so long as I am using the slash division, okay, the slash, it performs real division. So your end result will always be of data type double. But if you want, using round, you can round it off to the nearest whole number. And you could have left d_average as double, and it will just round it off to the nearest whole number. or you could have left it to an integer. Alternatively, you could have used float to string. Okay, so all depending what you wanted to use, and that would have been I average. And if you're making it an integer value, do not forget it's then going to be int to string. So it all depending on how you want to format it. If the question says format it, round it off to the nearest whole number, you can alternatively use float to string f and use ff number, 8, 0. 0 will round it off to no decimal places. Or you could use round, which is the function of the math unit. Thank you, students, for listening. Stay inspired, stay motivated, and follow me on my next video.